Amy Turner set out for what she believed would be the most profound adventure of her life, a solo journey through the Grand Tetons' most breathtaking canyons. By the time she vanished, it was as if the mountains had simply swallowed her whole, leaving behind nothing but silence and mystery. For months, her father scoured the rugged peaks and valleys every single weekend, chasing faint traces in the wilderness, refusing to let the trail or his hope go cold. Search teams found nothing but wind, stone, and fading footprints that seemed to dissolve into the wild. Then, nearly a year later, a ranger studying golden eagles spotted something on a precarious cliffside, something that would dismantle everything investigators thought they knew, revealing a chilling truth hidden in one of America's most stunning landscapes. The Grand Tetons are not mountains that ease you in. They don't rise gradually or announce themselves with gentle slopes. They explode upward from the valley floor of Jackson Hole like jagged lightning frozen in stone, raw, ancient, and utterly unmoved by human longing or fear. The peaks stand like sentinels of another age, where survival demands both reverence and grit. For generations, people have come here not merely to visit, but to measure themselves against the land, to seek peace, beauty, and the quiet, humbling reminder of their own fragility. In the summer of 2023, 24-year-old Amelia Turner, Amy to everyone who loved her, arrived in search of all three. She carried herself with the quiet poise of someone more at home in wind and pine than in crowded city streets. A year earlier, she had traded a promising but stifling graphic design career for a modest apartment in Jackson, a part-time job at a local gear shop, and a front-row view of the mountains she had been infatuated with since she was a child. Her apartment was a sanctuary for her passions. Topographic maps of the Teton Range covered her walls, crisscrossed with penciled lines that marked both past triumphs and future dreams. Her photographs, moody and meticulous, hung beside them, a bull moose dissolving into the Snake River's morning fog, the Middle Teton bathed in the fiery blush of alpenglow, a sky pilot flower defying the wind high above the tree line. Friends described her as precise to the point of reverence. She wasn't chasing adrenaline or danger. Her love for the wilderness was deliberate, studied. She respected the mountains' power, understood their unpredictability, and carried the humility of someone who knew they owed their safety to preparation and respect. Alone on the trail, she found a clarity she could never quite capture in words, only in the whisper of the wind, the rhythm of her breath, and the satisfying click of her camera shutter. That camera, a weathered Nikon D750, was more than gear. It was her way of bottling the feelings the wild stirred within her, transforming fleeting beauty into something permanent. For weeks, she had been preparing for her most ambitious solo trek. A 4-day, 3-night push along the Paintbrush Canyon Cascade Canyon Loop. It was a Teton classic, but not for the unprepared. 20 miles of grueling elevation gain, narrow ridges exposed to the sky, and vistas so staggering they made the air feel thinner. For Amy, this wasn't just a hike. It was a pilgrimage, a personal summit of skill, endurance, and art. She envisioned this trip as the foundation of her first gallery show, a collection of images that could convey the wordless poetry of the Tetons. Her roommate, Chloe, remembered the nights leading up to the departure. Amy on the living room floor, maps spread wide, her headlamp casting an amber halo over her concentrated expression. She traced her route with her fingertip like someone committing a prayer to memory. Her mother, Sarah, recalled their last video call. Amy's face was alight with anticipation as she displayed her neatly laid out gear, her weathered blue Osprey pack, her featherweight tent, a down sleeping bag packed tight, a tiny camp stove, and her Garmin satellite messenger. She promised to check in every night without fail. Even her food was organized, each day's rations sealed and labeled. The thoroughness was almost a comfort in itself. On the morning of August 12, 2023, The String Lake trailhead bustled with hikers. The air was crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth, the sky a flawless blue. Before hoisting her pack, Amy noticed an older couple admiring the mountain's reflection on the still water. With an easy smile, she asked if they'd take her photo. The man, Gerald, obliged, unknowingly capturing the image that would become her most circulated portrait. Amy in a pink tank top, blonde hair pulled back, trekking pole in hand, the cathedral-like Tetons towering behind her. She seemed so happy, the couple would later tell rangers. She said she felt like the luckiest person alive to have this as her backyard. After saying goodbye, Amy lingered by the water, breathing in the mountain air as if storing it for the days ahead. She sent the photo to her mother with a short message. "Off I go. The mountains are calling. Weather is perfect. Talk to you Sunday night." With that, she adjusted her straps and stepped onto the trail, her figure slipping into the cool shadows of the lodgepole pines, one small solitary shape vanishing into an ocean of wilderness. By the time Sunday's sun slipped behind the jagged silhouette of the Tetons, the sky was a masterpiece of molten orange, bleeding into bruised purple. In her Salt Lake City home, Sarah Turner glanced at her phone, expecting the reassuring ping of a message from her daughter. 9 o'clock came and went without a sound. At first, she brushed it off. Amy was seasoned in the backcountry. Maybe her satellite messenger's battery had died. Maybe she'd lingered with fellow hikers and decided to camp an extra night beneath the stars. But by Monday evening, the comfortable logic she clung to had unraveled into something colder, a slow, choking dread that wrapped around her chest. The silence from the mountains felt unnatural, as if the peaks themselves were holding their breath. Every call went straight to voicemail, Amy's bright, familiar voice now an unbearable echo. Every text Sarah sent sat with a single, gray check mark, like a message tossed into a black well. Sarah knew her daughter's rhythms, her discipline, her reliability. Amy would never vanish into the wilderness without keeping her word. At 7:15 p.m., her hands trembling so badly she had to steady the phone against the table, Sarah called the Teton County Sheriff's Office. She started composed, but her voice fractured when she gave Amy's name, age, and route. Within the hour, the National Park Service was mobilized. A ranger was dispatched to the String Lake trailhead to confirm the presence of her vehicle. By nightfall, as the moon climbed over the indifferent peaks, Amelia Turner's name shifted from the warm realm of memory into the cold bureaucracy of a missing persons file. At first light on Tuesday, veteran ranger Tom Albright, his face as weathered as the stone spires he patrolled, stood beside Amy's silver Subaru. The parking lot, once alive with hikers' laughter, was now heavy with dawn's stillness. A thin film of pollen and dust coated the windshield, marking days of abandonment. Inside, a half-empty travel mug rested in the console. A folded map lay on the passenger seat. Nothing was obviously wrong, yet the normalcy of it all felt wrong in itself. The trail register confirmed her plans. Paintbrush Cascade Loop, 3 nights, expected return Sunday. No sign-out entry. In 2 decades of service, Albright had seen this scenario end well. Hikers strolling out late with sheepish smiles. But as he radioed in, a knot of concern settled deep in his gut. By 8 a.m., the search had escalated into a full-scale operation. The Teton Interagents Search and Rescue Team assembled at a command post near Jenny Lake. The air pulsed with organized urgency, climbing gear clinking against packs, radios murmuring, the sharp bite of strong coffee mingling with pine. Incident Commander Mike Connolly stood before a massive topographic map, the loop outlined in a hard red line through some of the harshest wilderness in the lower 48. Our subject is Amelia Turner, 24 years old, experienced, well-equipped, he began, his calm voice carrying the weight of necessity. Primary target is Holly Lake. That's where we start. Teams split in both directions along the loop. K-9 units were helicoptered to high passes to work their way down. By noon, a ground crew spotted something. A muted green dome tent nestled in a grove of firs near Holly Lake, exactly where Amy had planned to be her first night. At first glance, it looked orderly, even serene. But inside was a riddle. Her sleeping pad lay, unrolled. Beside it was her lightweight day pack. Inside, only an empty water bottle, a protein bar wrapper, and sunscreen. Her main Osprey pack, with her food, sleeping bag, and essential gear, was gone. So were her boots. The scene made no sense. Day hikers might leave a heavy pack behind for a short excursion, but they wouldn't leave their day pack. It was a violation of basic backcountry logic, a detail that sent a ripple of unease through the team. K-9 units were rushed to the site. Kaiser, the team's most seasoned German shepherd, sniffed the tent flap and took off, not toward the trail, but up a steep, debris-choked slope into the dense willows. After half a mile, he stopped among massive granite boulders tangled with deadfall. He sniffed, circled, and sat down with a low whine. The scent was gone, not faint, not lost, but simply ended, as if Amy had been lifted from the earth. Meanwhile, rangers tracked down the Ohio couple who'd taken Amy's final photograph. They remembered her joy, but also recalled passing a lone male hiker 10 minutes later. A gaunt man in his late 30s or early 40s, carrying a faded military-style pack. He avoided eye contact, greeting no one. The description was vague, but in the absence of other leads, it became a point of focus. A sketch was drawn. Deep-set eyes, weathered face, grim expression. Whether he was a witness or something darker, no one knew. From above, the search helicopter combed the labyrinth of ridges and valleys. The view was breathtaking and merciless. Forest canopies stretched unbroken, swallowing the ground. Sheer canyon walls hid countless blind spots where a human could disappear forever. On the 5th day, the sky darkened. A storm rolled in with a voice of thunder, lightning raking the peaks, rain slicing sideways through the air. For 36 hours, search teams were grounded. The downpour would wash away any fragile traces, footprints, scent trails, leaving the land clean and silent. It was as if the mountains themselves conspired to erase her. After 10 days, the only tangible evidence remained the tent and the impossible dead-end trail. Resources were exhausted. At the evening briefing, Connolly's voice was heavy as he announced the transition from active search to limited continuous patrol, a term that quietly acknowledged what no one wanted to say. The odds of finding Amy alive had withered to almost nothing. The command post came down. Volunteers went home. And in Jackson, Amy's parents sat in the heavy stillness of absence, their vigil broken not by answers, but by the echoing silence of the mountains. Mark Turner stood alone in the hollow stillness of the now deserted briefing room, his eyes fixed on the map that had once guided dozens of rescuers. The red line tracing his daughter's intended path cut sharply through a vast wilderness of empty contours and shaded ridges. Around it stretched miles of rugged terrain that had already swallowed 1,000 search hours. And yet, to him, it was just the beginning. The Tetons shifted with the seasons in a way that could break your heart. Summer's electric greens faded into the molten gold and rust red of autumn, a fleeting brilliance that flared for weeks before vanishing beneath the first hard snows of October. By then, the jagged peaks disappeared behind low, sullen clouds, and winter's silence settled over the range like a sentence. Deep, absolute, older than memory itself. For the public, Amelia Turner's name began to cool into something harder, more distant. She became a story whispered to new seasonal rangers and cautious hikers, a gifted photographer who entered Paintbrush Canyon and never came out. Missing posters once taped up in visitor centers curled at the corners, their ink bleached by high-altitude sunlight. Her case file, now thick with forms, maps, and exhausted leads, felt paradoxically colder with each page. She joined a quiet list of those the mountains had claimed. Lives folded into the land with no clear ending, leaving behind only grief and questions. But for Mark, that list meant nothing. His daughter was not folklore, not a cautionary tale. She was a constant, a fixed star in his life. He could not and would not accept the idea that she could vanish without a trace. A retired land surveyor, Mark had spent decades turning the chaotic folds of the earth into clean, readable maps. He had measured ridgelines and traced watersheds with quiet precision. Now he turned that same skill into a weapon against the unknown. Where the official search had painted broad strokes across the landscape, Mark worked in painstaking detail. He sold a small piece of land to fund his own operation, sacrificing the comfort of retirement for a lonely mission fueled by grief and stubborn devotion. His weekends became a ritual of endurance, driving through the night from Salt Lake City to Jackson in his aging Ford F-150, the bed packed with surveying gear, climbing equipment, and enough food to last days. Rangers came to recognize his truck at trailheads before sunrise and long after dark. They greeted him with quiet respect, offering coffee and gentle warnings about the weather. They knew he was chasing a ghost, but they also understood a father's refusal to surrender. Mark never wandered blindly. He created his own high-resolution maps, layering satellite imagery with geological data, dividing the wilderness into dozens of small quadrants. Each weekend he chose a single square to comb, sometimes a narrow drainage where snowmelt carved deep shadows into the rock, sometimes a patch of forest so dense that light barely touched the ground. He searched for anything out of place, a scrap of fabric, an unnatural depression, the faint shimmer of metal. Most days yielded nothing, yet each blank space on his map only sharpened his resolve. The search was no longer about hope for survival. It was about bringing her home. Every frozen mile he walked was an act of defiance against the idea that the mountains could erase her so completely. While Mark scoured the physical world, another search raged online. On true crime forums and hiking message boards, Amy's case became a puzzle for thousands of digital detectives. Some clung to the most likely scenario: a fatal slip on loose rock, her body concealed by terrain too rugged to search completely. Others chased darker possibilities: a surprise encounter with a grizzly or mountain lion. But there were no signs, no blood, no torn gear, no disturbed ground to support that theory. Then came the more unsettling narrative, that Amy had chosen to disappear. They dissected excerpts from her journals, shared in desperation by her family, lines about longing for solitude, about feeling unmoored from the life she had left behind. To some, it became evidence of a deliberate escape into the wilderness, a final walk into a life beyond reach. To Mark, these theories, however loudly debated, meant nothing. There was only the map, the land, and the unwavering knowledge of his daughter's character. And until the day he found her, the search would not end. The theory of foul play had always been the most unsettling thread in Amelia Turner's disappearance, and the intense hiker soon became its dark center of gravity. Online, he transformed into a ghostly figure with many names: the Teton Phantom, Cascade Creek John Doe, the man with the pack. With no identity and no evidence linking him to anything concrete, he became a blank canvas for fear, suspicion, and the human tendency to invent monsters when confronted with the unknown. In forum after forum, people spun their own versions of him: a predator stalking the trails, a man who shadowed Amy from the parking lot, an opportunist lying in wait. The absence of facts only deepened the myth, making him a cautionary apparition whispered about by hikers crossing the Tetons alone. For months, there was nothing: no sightings, no new leads. Mark Turner pressed on with his solitary searches, and the internet churned in its endless cycle of speculation. Then, almost a year later, in late August 2024, something surfaced, quite literally. A fly fisherman wading a remote stretch of Cascade Creek, far from the original search grid, saw a flash of metal caught between two rocks beneath the rushing water. Wading in, he pulled free a single black Lecky hiking pole, its handle worn smooth by countless miles, its tip scratched and scarred. He recognized the brand. It was the sort of gear chosen by serious hikers. And he remembered the missing posters of the young photographer who had haunted the news the summer before. He reported the find immediately. For the first time in months, the cold case stirred with electricity. Investigators confirmed it was the same model seen in Amy's last photograph, the pole clutched in her right hand. For her parents, hope flared painfully, a fragile light in the darkness. Search. Teams returned to Cascade Creek with renewed purpose, but hydrologists quickly tempered the optimism. In the Tetons' volatile watershed, a spring runoff could easily dislodge gear from miles away, carrying it down into the creek bed. The pole could have started almost anywhere. It was real, it was hers, but it offered no map, no answer, just another piece that wouldn't fit the puzzle. The mountains had yielded one small secret, only to tighten their grip on all the others. Summer returned to the high country. Wildflowers erupted in riotous color, painting the meadows in blues, yellows, and pinks. Marmots stretched lazily on warm granite. Golden eagles rode in visible currents, their shadows sweeping the alpine slopes below. And it was among these winged hunters that the first true break in the case appeared, carried not by rumor or speculation, but by the eyes of a man who had spent his life watching the sky. Ranger David Chen was a 15-year veteran of the National Park Service, respected for his encyclopedic knowledge of the ecosystem. His heart, however, belonged to ornithology, especially the golden eagles that ruled these skies. In late July 2024, almost exactly 11 months after Amy vanished, David was deep into his annual survey of nesting sites. His work took him into places few humans ever stood. Lonely, wind-scoured basins hemmed in by sheer cliffs, where the sound of the world was reduced to wind and the occasional cry of a hawk. From a high ridge, binoculars steady in his hands, he scanned a cliff face known to harbor an established eagle nest. Through the glass, he found it. A sprawling fortress of sticks balanced precariously on a grassy ledge halfway up the wall. But what caught his attention wasn't the nest's size. It was the unnatural flashes of color woven into its structure. Bright turquoise, faded red. They didn't belong here. At first he assumed trash, plastic bags, scraps of tarp, human carelessness carried by the wind. It was an annoyance he'd encountered before, and it could pose a danger to the birds. Determined to remove it, he radioed his location to dispatch, slung his binoculars, and began the steep climb. The ascent was a test of patience and precision. Loose scree shifting underfoot, tufts of grass clinging to impossible angles. Each handhold tested before committing weight. The closer he got, the more the colors took on definition, and with it came a creeping unease. The turquoise was not a tarp at all. It looked like ripstop nylon, torn from something made for the backcountry. And the red wasn't plastic. It was the faded trim on what appeared to be women's underwear. Pulling himself onto the ledge, David stood before the nest, its chaotic weave nearly 5 feet across. The turquoise fragment was clearly part of a stuff sack or rain cover. The underwear was mostly white, but the crimson edging was unmistakable. In that instant, a memory surged. The missing posters, the final photograph, at the trailhead, the blue backpack with bright red straps. The match was too close to dismiss. The air seemed to thin around him. This was no random piece of litter. This was a trace, deliberate or accidental, of a life that had been missing for almost a year. His pulse quickened, but his hands were steady as he raised his phone. He photographed everything from multiple angles, careful not to disturb a single branch. The evidence was delicate, and whatever story it told was one the mountains had guarded for far too long. David Chen knew immediately that what he had found could change everything. His voice, normally calm and deliberate, was tight when he keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Chen. I'm at the Upper Basin nesting site. I may have something, possibly connected to the Turner case." The words cut through the ranger station like a lightning strike. After a year of silence, the cold case that had sat stagnant in dusty files was suddenly, violently alive. When Chen returned, the items were already sealed in evidence bags, tagged, and placed gently on the table beside a high-resolution print of Amy's last photograph. The turquoise nylon scrap and the weathered white underwear with faded crimson trim seemed to hum in the sterile light. The red matched almost perfectly with the bright straps of her osprey backpack. No one spoke for a long moment. The implication was heavy enough to sink through the floor. Whispers began among the investigators, men and women seasoned enough to recognize what this meant. Golden eagles are hunters, but they are scavengers too. They are drawn to carrion, to the scent of death. The most chilling possibility was that an eagle, soaring over the basin, had caught the scent of Amy's remains or blood-soaked clothing, torn away a piece, and carried it to its nest to weave into the structure. If that theory held, it meant Amy's final resting place was not somewhere lost in the hundreds of square miles of the Tetons. It was somewhere close to that ledge. The impossible vastness of the search had narrowed to one brutal, unforgiving hillside. The Park Service authorized a new mission, one not of rescue, but of recovery. This time, the team would not scour for a lost hiker. They would search for a grave. The effort began not with the sprawling optimism of the first search, but with the grim, surgical focus of an operation that expected the worst. Forensic anthropologists from the University of Wyoming, experts at coaxing stories from bone, joined the mission. Top cadaver dog teams were flown in, along with Teton County search and rescue veterans skilled in high-angle recovery. Helicopters dropped them into a staging area below the eagle's nest, their rotors churning the alpine meadow into a frenzy of wind. The search zone was tight, 1 square mile, but the terrain was a punishing mix of unstable scree, steep grass slopes, and jagged outcroppings. Every step demanded caution. The dogs worked in disciplined sweeps, their handlers speaking in low, even tones. For 2 days, there was nothing but the hiss of wind and the endless presence of the mountains. Doubt began to creep in. Then, on the 3rd morning, Odin, a black Labrador with a flawless record, froze near a thick knot of thorned brush growing at the base of massive boulders. His whine was low and constant as he pawed at the ground. The team converged. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Alana Rios crouched in the shadows of the brush, her eyes scanning for patterns only she would recognize. She saw it instantly. The soil was disturbed, the stones piled in ways no storm or landslide would arrange. "Start here," she murmured. They began the slow excavation with trowels and brushes. Every inch was measured and documented. After nearly an hour, a searcher's tool scraped against something that yielded beneath it. Gently, the dirt was brushed away, revealing faded blue fabric, the sleeve of a technical hiking shirt. Moments later, the unmistakable curve of human bone emerged from the soil. Over several hours, they unearthed a shallow grave, no more than 2 feet deep, containing skeletal remains. The bones were airlifted to the county morgue. Dental records confirmed the truth within a day. Amelia Turner had been found. The news to her parents was a devastating mixture of agony and relief. The year-long purgatory of uncertainty was over, but so was the last fragile hope. Yet the final blow came with the autopsy. Dr. Rios found multiple fractures, including a devastating one to the skull, consistent not with a fall, but with a violent assault. Further analysis revealed evidence of sexual assault before death. The case was no longer an accident. It was murder. Every early assumption collapsed under the weight of this revelation. The intense hiker, once just a vague figure in the narrative, was now elevated from person of interest to prime suspect. His composite sketch, previously a shot in the dark, was re-released, not as a man who might have seen something, but as someone who might have done it. The news ripped through Jackson and the online communities that had clung to the mystery. The story had shifted from haunting disappearance to brutal homicide, and fear replaced speculation. The shadow that had hung over the Tetons now had sharper edges and a face. The break that would shatter the shadowy mystery of Amelia Turner's case came from a place no one expected, a budget roadside motel in the quiet ranching town of Pinedale, Wyoming. Brenda, the woman at the front desk, was watching the local news when a composite sketch flashed on the screen. The deep-set eyes, the gaunt, expressionless face. It struck her like a punch. She knew that face. The man had stayed at her motel the previous summer, paying cash each week, speaking to no one. His presence a gray, oppressive weight that seemed to drain the life from the room. He said he was doing seasonal construction work. Then, without notice, he had vanished. Just days after the first reports of the missing hiker had hit the news. She pulled the motel ledger. The name he'd signed was Robert Frazier. The moment she called the Teton County Sheriff's tip line, the investigation ignited. Within hours, a joint task force had traced Frazier's trail, a 42-year-old drifter with no social media, no bank accounts, and a sealed juvenile record for violent assault. His life was a dotted line across the western states, from one under-the-table job to the next. By cross-referencing temporary labor rosters and ranch payrolls, investigators tracked him to a sprawling, isolated property outside Billings, Montana. At dawn, a convoy of FBI agents and deputies descended on the ranch. They caught him before he had time to think, let alone run. His arrest was almost anticlimactic. No fight, no protest, just a hollow stare. In a dust-choked shed, hidden beneath tarps and old tools, they found his locked military-style footlocker. Inside was a predator's archive. Women's driver's licenses, tarnished jewelry, strands of hair tied with cheap ribbon. And at the bottom, wrapped in a worn t-shirt, a Nikon D750 camera. The serial number matched Amy's exactly. When FBI forensics examined the memory card, the first images were Amy's, her lens capturing the Tetons with her usual haunting beauty. But then, the frame shifted. Frazier had taken over the camera. The last sequence of images documented his crime in unflinching detail. Amy's face twisted in terror, the struggle, the assault, and finally, the stillness of death. The interrogation room was a sterile cube, its air heavy with the weight of the unspoken. Frazier sat stone still, a mask of denial that neither the FBI agent nor the Teton County detective could pierce. Then, methodically, the agent laid the photographs out in front of him, beginning with the landscapes, then moving into the images of him stalking her, each one closer than the last. Finally, the photos of the attack were placed before him, their sequence telling a story that no words could soften. Frazier's eyes followed the images in silence. 7 minutes passed before he spoke, his voice as flat as the Wyoming plains. "That's me," he said, nodding almost imperceptibly toward one of the frames. From there, the confession came, not with remorse, but with the clinical precision of a man recounting the mechanics of a hunt. He described watching her at the trailhead, following her to Holly Lake, waiting until she stepped away for water. The attack was swift and violent. She fought with a strength he hadn't anticipated, and he killed her to end her resistance. He buried her in the shallow grave and took her camera as a trophy before disappearing into the night. When asked why, he offered the coldest answer imaginable. She shouldn't have been there alone. That confession connected him to at least 2 other unsolved disappearances of female hikers in the Rockies. The ghost had a name, and it was far darker than anyone had imagined. The trial was swift. The photographic evidence and his own words made the jury's decision inevitable. Amy's parents, Mark and Sarah, sat through every day, their grief filling the courtroom like a second atmosphere. When the guilty verdict was read, kidnapping, sexual assault, first-degree murder, The judge condemned Frazier to life without parole. The items in his footlocker reopened other cold cases, giving answers to families in Colorado and Idaho who had endured years of the same agonizing limbo. Frazier had stalked the wild places, using the beauty of the backcountry as camouflage for his hunts. For Mark and Sarah, justice came, but peace did not. They buried their daughter beneath open sky, at a park overlook where the cathedral peaks rose in solemn witness. Friends told stories, laughter and tears mingling in the thin mountain air. When Mark spoke, his voice was steady. "I just wanted to find my little girl." The Tetons remain as they were. Sunrises still gild the peaks. Rivers still cut cold paths through stone. But for those who know Amy's story, the beauty is forever shadowed. The wilderness holds storms and cliffs and predators without conscience. Sometimes the most dangerous thing on the trail is another human being, walking quietly, smiling never, waiting for the moment no one else is watching.